Yud Amid Beis in the Mishnah. The Mishnah was listing a host of things that we use the funds collected in the communal fund, what are considered part of communal karbanos. We said the paraduma, the red heifer, the goat that is sent out on Yom Kippur, the red thread, the red wool that was used to show that the sins had been forgiven and that they would be returned to white. Also, that was thrown into the mix of the red heifer to be burned and to be part of the ash of the red heifer water. Also, there's the red thread of mitzvah as well. So there's the lashon shel zaharis, the red threads. They all come by mitrumas halishka. They come from the money that was donated in the shkal with the shekel. There was also a kevesh, a ramp, made that brought the paraduma, the red heifer, from Harabayis, from the Temple Mount, to the next hillside where they would burn it and do the offering. And this was primarily in order to protect it from becoming tamei, and this was in addition extra protection that the Chachamim had enacted in order to make sure that there's no unknown grave, unknown tumah beneath it. And it was a part of teaching the halachos of how tumah applies to a red heifer, and how the kohen who had gone to the mikveh that day can do the red heifer. So various halachos were relevant for the paraduma, and the Chachamim enacted this protection as a part of that. So building that ramp was also, or bridge really, was also a part, came from the communal fund. Also, similarly, to send the goat that was sent out into the desert to Azazel. Also, that ramp that took him from the Arabais to the beginning of the desert is also built from these funds. Also, the red string, which we mentioned before, which there were two. One was in the Beis Hamikdash with the Sawyer, the goat that was La Hashem, and also the one that went into the red heifer, into the paraduma burning. And this is the one that went out with the Sar HaMishtalech, with the goat that was sent out and was between his horns. Va'amas hamayim, also the building of the stream of water, the fresh water that came through in the Azara, in the courtyard. V'chomes ha'ir, the city walls of Yerushalayim, Migdal Oseh and its towers, v'chol tzarkei, and all of the needs of the city, which would include guards of those places, and the streets, the fixing the streets, the water pits, its marketplaces. All that comes by in Mishiyar Lishka. That comes from the remaining funds that were left in the Lishka, in the collection box, as well as we'll see. There's the funds itself that were collected, that went for the karbanos, etc. Then there is what remains in the lishka, and then the leftovers from last year. Abishal Lomer, however, Abishal says, Kevesh Parakanam Gedolim Mishalatzman. The Kohen Gadol used to pay for the ramp of the red heifer of the paraduma on his own, and of his own funds. Now, Moshe Shiarei Lishka, the leftovers of the leftovers of the Lishka, which is after you did with them all of the communal needs that were needed. Maya Isamim. So what would you do with the leftovers? So you had a surplus in the collection for the karbanos, and you use it for communal city works, and there was a surplus beyond that. So what would they do with them? So the first opinion says that the Beis Hamikdash would do commerce with it. They would buy wine, oil, and salt, wine, oil, and fine flour. These are items that were needed in the Beis Hamikdash for so it's essentially a service, but they did commerce for profit. And the profit would go to hektish. Divrei Rabbi Yishmael, that's what Rabbi Yishmael offered. Rabbi Akiva, however, Rabbi Akiva disagreed. Ein mistaker b'shel hektish. You don't use hektish for profit. Now, the language of the Mishnah seems to say that because you can't use hektish for business, for commerce, it belongs to hektish. However, others explain it differently, that it doesn't mean that because you can't use hektish for that, but rather it doesn't look good on account of ein aniyas b'makam ashiras. It's a form of poverty to do commerce in wine and oil and sell it to those coming to Beis Hamikdash, and it's not appropriate in a place of the communal wealth. So the idea is this is a Beis Hamikdash. It's a place of serving Hashem, and it's inappropriate to be involved in making nickel and diming the community. However, the next part clearly is because of the chance of misuse in regards to the funds of the poor. Also, funds collected on behalf of the poor, it would be the same thing, that you wouldn't use that for commerce. And there, the reason is because you can lose the principal, and the poor people need it. So in regards to Beis Hamikdash, we're talking about the surplus of the surplus. So if you lose that principal amount, it's not really going to set the Beis Hamikdash back. Whereas the funds that you collect for the poor, if you invest that and you lose the principal amount, you're actually it's a setback for the needs of the poor. Mosarat Teruma. What about the leftovers of the teruma, which is we said that they would collect from the collection box. They would take 3 tubs, three times a year, and from those with 3 smaller collection buckets that they would use for the karbanos. And what happened if there was some leftovers in those funds? So up until now, we talk about was left in the collection box after they took out the 3 large tubs. Over here, we're talking about what's left in those small tubs or buckets. So the Mosarat Teruma, so that was originally dedicated for karbanos, and they've purchased all the karbanos of the year. Now the end of the fiscal year came, and you have leftovers. So what do? So, Mao Isabem, that they would use to refinish the gold of the inside of the Holy of Holies. Divrei Rabbi Shmuel, that's Rabbi Shmuel. Rabbi Shmuel Leimer, Mosar Peir. So here's a new thing, and the Gemara is going to explain what this Mosar Peir, the leftover of produce, is. So Rabbi Shmuel says the leftover of the produce, ketzem mizbeach, that would be used for extra karbanos on the mizbeach when on a day that there weren't a lot of people bringing karbanos. Moser teruma, the leftover of teruma, lekli sharis, was used for the enhancement or the rededication of kli sharis, of vessels of service. Rabbi Kiva Eimer, however, Rabbi Kiva says no. Moiser teruma leketza mizbeach. The leftovers of teruma, which we'll see what that is for the mizbeach, for excess carbonas or extra carbonas on days that there weren't a lot of people coming, and moiser nesachim, the leftovers of the libation of the nesachim lekli sharis, that went to the vessels of service. Rabbi Hananias got a kahanim. Rabbi Hananias got a kahanim. He says, "Meiser nesachim, the leftovers of the libations and nesachim, ketzah mizbeach." From there, they purchased carbonas for days that not a lot of people came, and meiser teruma, and the leftover of the teruma lekli sharis, that went for kli sharis, for the vessels. And both Rabbi Kiva and Rabbi Hananias got a kahanim did not agree with the leftovers of fruit of produce. So the Gemara is going to, we'll see what that is. So kevish par, the ramp for the red heifer, that was bought from the funds of the communal carbon, as well as the goat that was sent out, and also for the goat that was sent out was also the red string between its horns. So Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel and Rabbi Nachman B'Shem Rabbi said, Gimel Hashanah said, there were actually 3 times that we used these red strings. Shel Soyer, the one of the goat that was sent out, that one was Shel Soyer B'Sela. That was the size of a sela, because that one had to be split in half. The goat that was sent out was pushed down the cliff and broken apart, and so the thread between its horns, this string between its horns was actually cut in half. Half remained between the horns, and half remained on a rock at the top of the hills of the cliff. So it was double size. It was the size of 2 shekel, which is a sela in worth, in order to have a full shekel on the horn as well as on the rock. Shel Mitzora, for the Mitzora, which the no, John, I don't think that has anything to do with this, and that is actually not necessarily a Jewish thing. It's found in other cultures as well. So the red string that was thrown into the fire of the Mitzora in his process of becoming tahor, that was b'shekel. That weighed a shekel, a half sela, or the value of that. And shel para b'shtei slay, for the one that was thrown into the fire by the red heifer that was used for ash for the red heifer water, that was the size of 2 slay, 4 times that size. Rabbi Chuna, the Beres Chavrin, Rabbi Chuna of this place, Beres Chavrin, and Rabbi Barba, Rabbi Bar Zavdo, M'Shem Rabbi Shimon Mechlafto, Shalpar b'shtei slay momechta. He actually said that was 2.5 sela of the Istim Mapkin, and some say it, which is the same amount, but they said it's Lishna the Mapkin Lishabasara Zuz, 10 zuz, because each sela has 2 shekel, each shekel has 2 zuz, which means that each sela has 4 zuz, and if it's 2.5 sela, that's 10 zuz. Rabbi Yehuda b'Shem Rabbi Shmuel, Tamid Chachamim Amlamdem Es Kahanim Al Echashchita, the Chachamim who taught the Kohanim the laws of Shechita, and Hilchas Kabbalah, the laws of receiving the blood, Hilchas Zerika, and the laws of how to spritz the blood. So these tutors, these teachers of the halacha to the Kohanim would also get paid from the karbonos money, from the shekel, half shekel money. Rabbi Yitzchak bar Rav Difa, b'shem Rabbi Imi Mavakre Mumei Kachim. Also, those that would check the animals that for blemishes, they got their wages also from the half shekel fund. Rabbi Achel Rabbi Tamcha Barachir B'Shem Rabbi Simlai Magia Sefer Azara. The Azara, the courtyard, had its Sifrei Torah, which the Kohen Gadol would read from, and there was a need to read from. So the Sefer Torah, the Sifrei Torah that were in the courtyard needed to be checked. And also Rashi tells us elsewhere that those Sfarim were very exact, and they needed, all the other Sifrei Torah were compared to it to see whether they had any mistakes in it to the Sefer in the Azara in the courtyard, and so therefore they needed to be checked properly and constantly, and so those Sifrei Torah, the checkers would also would take their wages from the shekel fund. Gido bar Minyamin b'shem Rabbi Yassi shtei dayid gzelos n'scharim etrumas halishka. There were two dayanim. We see certain halachas that we learn from them. Two dayanim, two judges that would deal with theft, specifically dayanim gzelos. They also took their fund, their wages from the communal fund.
Rabbi, I'm sorry, I missed the last couple of days. Can you tell me the page number and position on the page that you're on?
10b, Yud Amid Beis. We're about 15 lines from the bottom. Second last word is Shmuel Amar.
Thank you.
20 lines. So Shmuel Amar, Nashim ha'erges bepareiches nodeschar betrumas halishka. That women who would do the weaving of the curtains, that separated the Beis Hamikdash from the Holy Holies, from the Kodesh HaKadosh, they would also take their payment, their wages from the half shekel donation fund. However, Rav Huna says no, that comes from the upkeep of the building. That's a different fund. This is for the karbanos. So all the other things have to do with the carbon itself. Here, you're talking about something that is weaving the curtain, which is a part of the structure of the building. And so that would really be a part of the upkeep of the building. So that's the upkeep fund. It's a different fund. Ma'apali. So what's the basis of Mechlekes? Kekarban. Shmuel Avidah Kekarban. Shmuel says it's like a carbon. And the reason that he says that it's like a carbon, and therefore the funds come from the carbon fund, is based on whether or not there's we'll see it has an aspect of kapara. The reason is, we know that on Yom Kippur and by various karbanos, the kohen would spritz some of the blood on the curtain that separated the Kodesh and the Kodesh HaKadoshim. So essentially, it's a part of the carbon service. However, Rav Huna, he says, Avila Kabinyan, he says it's a part of the structure because it really was a part of it's a wall. It was in place of the wall that was there. The first Beis Hamikdash and the second Beis Hamikdash, it was a curtain, and it's really just a part of the structure, and so it has the rules of the upkeep of the building. Amar Rav Chizkiya, Amar Rav Yehuda, Gadgadis, he says, Haktoris v'chol karbanos hatzibur, the ketores, the incense burning, and all of the communal offerings, by mitrumas halishka, they all come from the communal fund that was collected in these half shekel coins. Mizbeach hazav v'chol kli sharis, the golden altar, which was this small altar in the Beis Hamikdash, not the large one that was in the courtyard, but the small one that was inside that mainly serviced the incense. And since it was not attached to the ground, essentially was a vessel. B'chol kli sharis, and all service vessels, by meiser nesach. That comes from the leftover of the nesachim of the libations, the leftover offerings, and the Gemara later is going to talk about more detail. What are the leftover nesachim, leftover wine, oil, etc. Mizbeach ha'olah, the mizbeach of the olah, which is attached to the ground, the larger one, v'ha'hechav hazaras, and the structure of the Beis Hamikdash and the courtyard. But Mishiyarei Lishka, that upkeep it came from the leftovers of the lishka that would remain in the collection box after the 3 buckets were taken out, because that's a part of the structure. Chutz la'azaris, that which was in the city, the outside of the walls, the rest of the Temple Mount, that was from the upkeep of the house. Wait, but we learned that the stones of the altar of the Mizbeach and of the Beis Hamikdash and of the courtyard, there's me'ilah, there's misuse of kachim in there. That must mean, so, and if you think that it comes from the shiarei lishka, the leftovers of the bucket, we said that there's no me'ilah in that because it's not left for a carbon. It's not a part of a carbon. If you remember, what we said was that the collection worked, everybody deposited their coins in this large deposit box. 3 large buckets or containers were taken out from there, and what was left in there was no longer used, dedicated for any karbanos. So there should be no me'ilah, no misuse of hekdesh funds. It was meant for a carbon. Is there me'ilah in the leftovers of the funds which are never meant for for a carbon? So Gemara says, Rabbi Meir, this follows the opinion of Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir, as we saw yesterday, that Rabbi Meir says that there is misuse of hekdesh in the leftover coins, because he says you can't use the leftover coins until the end of the year when we know there were enough funds to cover all the karbanos. If there was a greater need, and they would go back to the leftover funds, and so these leftover coins in the box that were left in the deposit box were also still used for a carbon, perhaps, or at least in case there was a need. So it was dedicated as kachim for that, and therefore the stones that were bought to fix the courtyard or the mizbeach or the structure of the Beis Hamikdash all came from funds that had been dedicated for karbanos, and therefore the stones would have me'ilah, misuse of hekdesh, whereas the chachamim disagree and say that the funds were never dedicated for karbanos. So Gemara says, wait, but Rabbi Meir only said it for that year, but at the end of the year, its leftovers never meant for a carbon anymore. And over here, it's beyond that year because we're using the funds to build a structure after that year. So Rav Yehuda Gadgadis says, that these vessels that were used in the Beis Kachakadash, in the Kodesh, in the Beis Hamikdash, actually, he said that they would come from the fund of these are the vessels that come from the fund of the karbanos, and they ma'akven es karbanos. They prohibit the karbanos if they're not not in place. Meaning, you have to have these vessels in place. You have to have the table. You have to have the menorah. You have to have the mizbeach inside, and they will invalidate karbanos. These are different Rabbi Meir. This is the opinion of Rabbi Meir. The Chachamim say that vessels not being there, ein lecha ma'akiv as a carbon. None of the vessels, if they're missing, would invalidate a carbon, hold back a carbon from being valid. The only one is ella hakir v'hakan mavad. Only the kiyur, the wash basin, and its stand, because the kahanim have to wash their hands. This is relevant, actually, a little bit today. Not so relevant, but theoretically relevant today, because halacha is, and we saw this in Pesachim, that we're allowed to bring a carbon pesach nowadays, because we're all tamei, and Korban Pesach is a korban that can come betuma, and so even though we don't have a Beis Hamikdash, we don't have the vessels, we don't have the altars, we can bring it as long as we have a wash basin for the Kohanim. So technically speaking, this is our relevant halacha. According to Rabbi Meir, we couldn't do it because we don't have all the vessels. However, according to the Chachamim, it doesn't invalidate a korban, and we would be able to bring it. So the Gemara says, "Look, Rabbi Elazar, didn't Rabbi Eliezer say, Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, Tavein Amrin, both Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yossi bar Chanina, they say, Kol hein d'chsiv noichach ma'akev. Anything that it says in that needs to be there, it says in the pasuk that the mizbeach, the menorah, is nechach, was a cross of this, and so the setup of the menorah, a cross of the table, and the table, it says on the side of the so it says anything that it says that it was a cross from, that's ma'akev, that must be there. Anything that it says on the side of Tzela ain't a ma'akev. However, Shmuel bar Nachman b'shem Rabbi Yosi, he said, "Afila Tzela ma'akev." No, even that which it says that it's on the side of, so the table is also ma'akev. Rabbi Ila b'shem Rabbi Shmuel bar Nachman. Rabbi Ila said in the name of Shmuel bar Nachman, "Afila sima ma'akev." Even if it didn't say that it is a cross of something on the side of something, just that the Torah says, and you will place it there. So that's by the Mizbeach. It says it will place it there. It's also ma'akev. It would also invalidate a korban if it's not there. In any case, there's, in regards to the kiyur, the wash basin, there's no machlokas. Everybody says that if that's missing, it's going to be ma'akev. It's going to be withhold a korban, because the kohanim would be invalid if they didn't do it. Now, so we have machlokas amaroim. We have machlokas in the later generations, the Amoraim, in something that it was already machlokas in Tanaim, and it differs because they're both not saying like Rabbi Meir or the Chachamim. So Gemara says they're actually disagreeing about two different things. Amar Rabbi Chanina Kam b'avodah shebifnim, that actually Rabbi Meir and the Chachamim talk about which vessels will invalidate the korban or not is only in reference to the avodas that have to go inside the courtyard. So it would not be relevant to Korban Pesach. Kam b'avodah shebachutz. And the Amoraim, we're talking about the service that is done in the courtyard, and that's relevant to Korban Pesach. And they're arguing about what vessels need to be in place. Amar Chanina, so now back to the ramp for the red heifer that was brought from the Beis Hamikdash across the mountain across the hillside, really to the next hilltop, and they used a ramp or a bridge to build it there. And our mission brought two opinions. One opinion that said that the funds came from the communal fund, and one said that actually the Kohanim Gedolim would pay for it themselves. So Rabbi Chanina says that Shachatzis Gedolah is a b'bnei Kohanim Gedolim. That actually this was a great haughtiness and it was inappropriate that the Kohanim Gedolah built it by themselves. And not only that, but they spent a lot of their own funds, even though there was already still a ramp or a bridge from the previous Paraduma, they built a new one for each one. More than 60 gold pieces were used to build this bridge. Even though there was a kevesh already standing, no one would use the old bridge. He would tear it down and build it again by himself. So Rabbi Chanina says this was a haughtiness and inappropriate. So Rav Ula in front of Rabbi Mana said, we learned that Shimon HaTzadik did the same thing. Shtei paras asa. He, in his lifetime, he had two red heifers that he had brought. and for each one he tore down and rebuilt the ramp or the bridge. You're telling me that Shimon the righteous did this out of haughtiness? He was such a humble and righteous person. He wouldn't have done this for haughtiness. So what's the halacha? Why did they do this? The entire ramp itself was just as a halachic a preference to do an extra protection for the tahara, to make sure that they didn't walk over a grave. It was an extra special thing that was done for it. So it really, in halacha, wasn't necessarily necessary, and the Chachamim enacted it as a specialty for the para, for the special carbon. And so they wanted to spend the money. Silsul para. It was a show of greatness, of an honor to this mitzvah that they did this for. And so it's not a haughtiness, but an honor to the mitzvah. Tani zizin eksalim rayetzim mekan mekan kadei shli yetzi yitzitze kahana v'yitama. And they also built protrusions on the side of these ramps in order to make sure that the kahanim that wanted to see or the procedure would not press against it and then touch the para and make it tummy. So Rabbi Kiva had said in our Mishnah that they wouldn't do business with the leftover funds. Ella, so what would they do? However, if the Kohen wanted to do business on behalf of the Beis Hamikdash, but he would take the loss himself, that's allowed. Kadaz Bar Zimna Diasmi, like Bar Zmina, who became the custodian of money for the poor. So in that case, the entire concern is the loss of the principal amount, and so he did business with these funds of the poor, of the orphans, and what he did is he guaranteed the principal amount, but allowed for a chance of them gaining. So there's no loss and a chance of gain, and therefore he did business with the poor. Asav Ashal Rabbi Mani asked Rabbi Mana Amar Elei in Bayis the Hefsid Didach V'Agre Tarbechon. If you want that to take the entire loss of the principal, and then the gain will be split between the poor and and yourself. So Shari, that's going to be permissible, because this way they have absolutely no chance of loss and a chance of a gain permissible. Rabbi Chia Barada is paked Gabi Madol Yasme Babakin, and he too did the same thing with funds of orphans that were deposited with him. Moisar Paris. We said in the Mishnah also three opinions. What's done with the leftover of the fruit, leftover of the teruma? So what are these things? Maslita Rabbi Shmuel. So the Mishnah is the opinion of Rabbi Shmuel, which Rabbi Shmuel had said that you can do a business with wine, oil, and fine flour to buy and sell, and with the leftover funds. So now what happens with the leftovers of those produce? That's what this question is. That's what the leftover produce is. The Moisar Paris, the meaning of that is the profits from this business, that the excess funds were used to invest in buying these commodities and then selling them off as people needed them. So the profits were used for Ketzim Mizbeach. That's what Rabbi Yishmael means, that they were used for days that there weren't a lot of karbanos. They would use these excess funds or the profits to buy the extra karbanos. And Rabbi Kiva disagreed and said there was they weren't allowed to do this business. So he didn't have a Moser Paris, a leftover produce, because he said it was not appropriate to do such business with the hektish money. Moser Nesachim. And the leftovers of the libation, Nesachim, what is that? Zisar Revius. This is the saw of Revius. So the way that somebody the investment, the buying of oils and flour for the Beis Hamikdash. So they were always the Beis Hamikdash always had the upper hand. They would always buy at the cheaper price and sell at the higher price. So they would buy at a certain amount, and if the price dropped, they got the better price, and if the price went up, they got at the market that they bought in at. So that's what this is, the excess saw that they would get out of the price increases that they had, that the Beis Hamikdash always would get the excess from. That's the Moser Nesachim. That's the way the first opinion explains this. Rabbi Tzvi Bar Yosef explained. However, Rabbi Yochanan Pasar Masnita Moser Peres Zu Saravias. However, Rabbi Yochanan says no, that actually in our Mishnah, when it says the excess produce, that's this deal that they had with the distributors, where they would buy in at a certain price, and if the price dropped, they got more, and if the price went up, they got in at the price they bought. So the Beis Hamikdash excess, that's the excess produce. And Moser Nesachim. So what is the Moser Nesachim? So according to this, what is the excess funds of the Nesachim of the libations? So this is Birutzin. So Birutzin is that anytime the Beis Hamikdash would receive any measure, they got a heaping measure, and when they would distribute measure, they would always get a smooth measure. So this way, the sellers and the buyers would never be underpaying or undergiving the Beis Hamikdash. They always wanted to make sure that they were giving the Beis Hamikdash the better the better amount. So those excesses, were the leftovers on the Nesachim that our Mishnah says. Well, what about Rabbi Tzvi Fischer? He doesn't hold of these heaping spoons. So he says So he says that actually it's the same thing. The heaping spoons and the excess amount in purchasing, where they bought it at a certain Beis Hamikdash bought it at a certain price, the price dropped, they got more. That part is the same as the heaping spoon, and it's the same. So al daite Rabbi Tzvi Bar Yosef nicha ein mistakim b'shel hekdesh, that you don't do business with hekdesh afle b'shel aniyim, and also not with aniyim. Lefikach zev zel lo'yemodim b'peres. That makes sense, since the Rabbi Kiva, Rabbi Chanina Skadakanim disagreed with the concept. Rabbi Shmuel said that they would do business with the excess funds and buy out in bulk wine, oil, and flour, and then sell a small amount. So since they disagree with it, and the meaning of Moser Peres is the funds, the profits from these from the business with the produce, with wine, oil, and flour. So therefore they say there is no such thing. However, according to Rabbi Yochanan, that says it's the excess in the flour that they would get in buying in at a certain price, locking in a price, but also if the price drops, they would get more. Rabbi Yochanan Kasha, or according to Rabbi Yochanan, why did Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Chanina Skadakanim not have this concept of leftover produce? But Tanina Amdu Megimel Yasmik Medalit, that if the price went up, he's still going to give it at the price of 4. And the price goes down. And yet in our mission it says they didn't agree that there was even a concept of pairs, but we learned that there is such a concept, that they would buy in and lock in at a certain price. All it means is, they agreed that there is a concept, but they didn't agree that the funds, the extra money made of these of locking in the price, and then when the price dropped, they got more. That excess funds was not used for the Ketz HaMizbeach, for the days that there weren't a lot of people bringing carbon, so that you needed more of communal carbonas. But they did agree that it went for klishares, for the upkeep or for the vessels. Ad kedom beritza tzibur, afilu beritza yachid. So, which tells us that the communal fund that had of that the heaping spoons came from, so that went to the klishares, to the to the upkeep and the fund of the vessels. However, what about private people when they brought carbonas and there was some excess? How can you make a communal carbon? How can I make a communal vessel from the funds that came from a private person's excess in the carbon? How would you make it? Wouldn't we? That mean that the communal vessels came from a private person's carbonas? So they said, no, that's similar to what we learned earlier. That a woman can make her own, the mother of a kohen can make her own son his kohen garments, but so they would have to then give it over to the community to become a part of the communal fund. So that would be the same here. So what about, fine? That's if it's in the liquids. So that would liquid go into a vessel and then become a communal carbon. And even the heaping of a private person's gift of dry, would that also be a part of the carbon? So it says yes. And we learn over there that this part of the Mishnah is not so important, but the idea is that we learn from over there that even the dry and the liquids will all be sanctified in a vessel, and if they were not, they would not be considered sanctified, and so they would use that funds, the excess funds, and to purchase new kachim, and it would be donated to the funds. It would not be a part of the carbon itself. So all of the heaping spoons, whether the liquid which spilled over or the dry which went was just a mound, they would be able to take those the excess off and collect them, and with that purchase new vessels. So what about the excess of ketoris, of the incense? What would they do with that? So they would use those funds, the excess spices, to pay for the spice maker. They would transfer it and onto coins of the umnin, and then they would pay the umnin, the spice maker, with these funds, and then they would buy it back with the Truma Chadasha, with the New Year's fund. So basically, last year's excess Teruma, they would transfer it onto a coin of the spice maker. And then they would take the funds from the new fiscal year, and buy back from the spice maker, and that's the way he made his profit. And it was a way to allow that the spices now come from the new year, and it was basically taking last year's funds to bring last year's spices into this year's fund as well. And if there were not yet enough or not yet coins from the new year, so then they would use last year's coins as well. All right, so that's the end of this Mishnah. Tomorrow